It's 7 o'clock now, so I'm going to call to order the September 30th, 2024 meeting of the Beacon City School District Board of Education. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of
the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Vicki, can you call the roll?
Ms. Erskine?
Present.
Ms. Flynn?
Excused.
Mr. Lewine?
Here.
Here.
Ms. Cush?
Excused.
Mr. Shenner?
Here.
Mr. White?
Here.
Ms. Hewer?
Here.
Ms. Stadler?
Here. Matt, can you point out the fire exits?
Yes, the exits are in the back of the LGI.
Okay. I don't see anyone here for public comment, so we can move on to tonight's workshop. The academic data review and instructional planning presentation from Assistant Superintendent Rodiciendo O'Neill. I don't know if I've ever said your last name out loud before. You did well.
Right. Good evening, everyone. Happy Monday. All right. So I'm going to do my best to be thorough but concise, like my college professor used to say. There's a lot of data that we're dealing with today. All right. So I wanted to start. So tonight what I wanted to do was I wanted to go over our state data. So this is not the data from like iReady or any of the other universal screeners that we have. So this is just basically state data was out in the public. Just kind of wanted to go over it so that we all have an understanding of how our students are doing. What I did was I wanted to compare it to last year's data because last year was the first year that our students was assessed with the new standards. So the next generation standards would have been in full implementation a couple of years ago, but because of COVID, that was delayed. So we were working on Common Core standards for the past couple of years as we transition into the next gen standards. Last year's assessment was the first time that grades 3 through 8 were actually tested in the next gen standards. So that was the baseline. And then this year, it's like the second year that we participated. So I wanted to also show you our participation rate. If you compare it between last year and this year, that's kind of really important because a lot of times, as you know, the information that is public, a lot of times they don't know how many students is actually representing. So if you look at the elementary level, we actually did a really good job of increasing our participation rate between last year and this year. We're almost at the required 95% participation rate that is required under ESSA. As the students get older, we are seeing more students that are not participating, which is their right. They have a right to refuse. But when they refuse, then, however, they do in the assessments is based on a smaller pool versus showing what the majority of our students can actually do. A trend that we are noticing that some of our higher achieving students are not participating in the state assessments. In 8th grade, one thing that's very unique about 8th grade in math, students who are in the algebra class are taking the Regents, and they are not taking the 8th grade math test. So when you see the scores for the 8th grade math test, that's why you're going to see a significant dip because the students who are doing the best in math are not participating in 8th grade. Last year also was the first time that we had our new science assessment, which was in 5th grade and 8th grade. Traditionally, there was a 4th grade and an 8th grade science test in New York State. However, it was the same exam that we had, I think, since the 90s. So they did change it. It was a very, very different test than the students were used to. There was no practical application like in the past. It was all reading and writing. So last year was the first time that we did it. So this would be the baseline for our students. All right, so we start with English language arts. So when we look at last year compared to this year, so in New York State, level 1 is students who have not met the standard, level 2 is approaching, level 3 is proficiency, and then level 4 is exceeding. So when you look at 3rd grade, also keeping in mind our 3rd grade students are first-time testers. So whatever they score in 3rd grade is the baseline for them. So when you want to, so 3rd grade, I always feel that you're not really comparing the same group of students because it's the first time that they tested, so you're always kind of with a new batch of students, you would say. When we look at 4th grade, you're going to actually see 3rd grade to 4th grade. The way New York State does the proficiency rates, they look at growth, not just proficiency. So if you notice that This year's group, when they took the assessment, we, at level 4, we had about around the same amount of students that exceeded the standards. In level 3, we had a little bit of a dip. We had more students that were scoring in level 1 than we did the year before. And in level 2, it was relatively the same. Now, I'm going to talk a little later in the presentation about why you're seeing some of these trends between last year and this year, but I want to kind of get through the data first. I'm sorry. So this was actually overall, 3 through 8 overall. And then now it's going down into grade levels. All right. So third grade, our first-time testers. So we had our level 1s did increase a little bit. We did have more students in level 2 than we did in the previous year. And then we had our level 3 and our level 4. This year, I am excited because our third grade students, if we have a good number of them participate, this year's third grade will be the first students who have gone through school without a COVID interruption. Every other grade level had interruptions. So this will be our first pure group with no interruptions. So this is how they performed between last year and this year. This is our grade 4. So if you notice our grade 4, when they were third graders, how they performed in ELA versus fourth grade. We did see more students go into level 4 between last year and this year. We did see a couple of students go into level 3. We did reduce our numbers of level 2, which is approaching. And then level 1, we do have a couple of more students in level 1.
So this isn't iReady, right?
No, this is the state assessment.
Only state assessment. Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
And then grade 5 between last year and this year. So as you notice, we are going to have a plan for these students because we are noticing there was a significant amount of students that were in level 1. And again, I'm going to explain some of the trends that kind of went on there as well. We did increase a little bit, level 4. We have our students in level 3, and then our level 2. So we have more students in level 1, but less students in level 2. And then we have our 6th graders. Our 7th grade students. Now, if you notice our 7th grade students, we did have a lot more students go into level 4. It's our 8th grade students, the ones participated in the assessments. And then going into mathematics. So our 3rd graders. Now we do have a good number now in math, at least our 3rd graders who are now current 4th graders, about 50% of them were proficient. When we look at 4th grade, we did have more students go into level 4. We had a little bit of an increase in level 1, more in level 2. So this is 5th grade. This is our 6th graders. Seventh grade. And then our 8th grade. And then our new science test, this is how the levels of our 5th grade, where they landed. And again, this is the baseline. And this is our 8th grade, which again, only 36% of our 8th graders participated in this assessment. So before we get into high school, in your presentation, you have actually the level of difficulty of the questions. So I wanted to include that because if you notice, there was a trend where last year, when the new assessments came out, the assessments have what's called level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4 questions. So it's the same thing as the level of proficiency. So a level 1 question is a little easier. As you go up in level, it becomes more and more rigorous. So it exceeds, so it's questions, so a level 4 question is a question that's actually above the grade level that the students are exposed to. If you compare 2023 with 2024, our students last year did take a harder assessment in each of the grade level, which is why you will see some of those dips. So the first year that they introduced the assessment, we had a lot more kids, we had some kids who did better. And then the second year of the assessment, the questions were a lot more rigorous. There were a lot more level 4 questions that were introduced. There were some grade levels in the first year that had no level 1, level 4 questions, and they did receive level 4 questions last year, the same way that there were some grade levels who didn't get any level 1 questions, which were a little bit easier questions.
Is that a trend that,
Sometimes it is. Sometimes the first time that students take the assessment, it will be, I don't want to say easier, but it would be less rigorous because that's how they get the baseline. And then the next year, they kind of up the ante because they figure you're continuing to teach. We want to keep challenging the students. You know, what I did notice was when I was actually looking at cutoff scores. So in order to get these certain levels, there's a certain cutoff score that the state determines every single year. And every year, the cutoffs are different. So you have to wait for the state to kind of put them out. So the reason that you're seeing a lot of those level 2s, we have a lot of students that had they had the same assessment of the previous year would have been level 3. We have students who miss level 3 by a couple of questions. You know, so it was interesting to see that trend in both ELA and in math, as well as across all different grade levels. There was a good chunk of kids that, you know, if they got 1 or 2 questions correct, they would have gone into level 3. Now, another trend that we noticed as well, and this is something that we've noticed even, it's been a past trend the last couple of years, is that a lot of our students, and Beacon is no different than other school districts, I noticed it when I was in Washingtonville, our students are giving multiple choice questions on the first day. On the second day, they're giving short answers. And depending on the grade level, they'll get more long responses that they have to do. And the questions are either 2 credit questions, 2-point questions, 3-point questions, and there's a rubric. We're noticing that a lot of students are not getting full credit when it's a constructive response. So they are getting the same, so the standard that's being tested when it's shown as a multiple choice question in that format, they're getting it correctly because I've analyzed the different standards. But when that standard is presented as a short answer, they're getting partial credit. So they're not getting full credit. So we know now that that's an area that we have to support our students. And we're going to talk about how we're going to do that, where how do we get our students to demonstrate what they know when it's a written response as opposed to a multiple choice response? Because clearly they know the concept if they're able to get it correct. And it's not 1 or 2 students that are getting it correct in multiple choice. About 90% are getting certain standards correct, but then when it's presented as a short answer, they're not getting full credit.
Is that primarily ELA or is that across all subjects?
Across, even in math, yeah.
How did they do compared to the county and the state?
We're on par with the county and the state. We're not that different from, thank goodness, from the county and the state. So we did better than some school districts, and some school districts did better than us, but we're on par. Yeah.
are you looking at this data compared to the iReady assessment?
Yes. So the iReady assessment looks completely different. Now, the one thing that I would say about iReady, and iReady we administer K-8, so we don't give it to the high school kids. It's not appropriate for them. But at least in the iReady assessment, we're seeing 95% of our kids. So 95% are participating in the iReady assessments, and the benchmarks are 3 times a year, so it's not a one and done. So we're seeing progression and we're seeing growth. And one of the things that iReady does in the fall, when they take the assessment, we get a baseline. In January, we see if there's been growth. It actually predicts a growth score and a stretch score. So the stretch score would be if they met, the appropriate amount of growth, and if they exceeded that, what it would be. So you get kind of these two markers for your students. Now, growth doesn't always mean that they're at grade level. So I always like to make sure that I differentiate that. So you can have a student that's coming in that's showing tremendous growth, but still may not necessarily be at grade level. And one of the things that iReady does is that, so if you were to take the diagnostic, I would be able to see what you did in all the different domains in ELA. So it shows me phonological awareness, it shows me phonics, high frequency words, comprehension in both literature as well as nonfiction. But then it also tells me, aside from giving me a full score and what you did in each domain, it tells me all the skills that you have and then skills that I need to support you in with lessons to accompany that. So a teacher is able to already start doing groups within those skills that students need more support. So we use that as a way to group our students, to have flexible grouping. I taught a class before, so I'm a little dry right now. So it gives us a lot of information for those small groups and those strategy groups. So when I look at the iReady scores, one of the things that we're seeing there is we're seeing the same thing that I'm going to talk about later in the trends around vocabulary, but we're seeing a lot of growth when the students are taking the benchmark assessments. So we're seeing actually more than 100% growth across all grade levels, with the exception of 8th grade. And one of the reasons we feel that we're probably not seeing that growth in 8th grade, I think the 8th graders don't really like taking iReady, the assessment, and I don't think they're as invested. We see that in the fall, I guess because they're coming in, they're fine. In January, you can tell there's like rush flags, that I can see kids who are getting it done in 15 minutes. There's no way they can get it done in 15 minutes. And by the time we do it in the spring. So we're working on we have a different plan for iReady at the middle school that hopefully will get us better results with the diagnostic so that it's a little bit more accurate.
Does this get shared at the schools? Do the principals share this with, as a group? Do they meet by grade level about it? How do they take these results? And, because I know you had the question breakdowns and everything. Mm-hmm. How does that happen at the various schools?
Okay. So I share the data with the principals, and the principals have data meetings with their teachers. And as a matter of fact, what I did a little bit different this year is I'm having individual meetings with principals to look at their state assessment as well as their iReady growth, and we're coming up with goals for the year and how they're going to present those goals to the teachers. So the data is always shared with them, and it's something that's a culture here of having data meetings at the school level. And if you saw, because you came to the curriculum meeting, I actually shared data and trends at the curriculum meeting as well, so that the content coordinators can support some of that work.
Is that something that when they do their building presentations that they could share with us of how they go about doing that? Just
Yep,
so
that's going
that
to be
we
part
can
of the
see
presentation.
that? Is that
Yep.
something? Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
Can I ask, sorry,
yeah.
what's the process for students to request not to take the assessment? There's a big change from elementary to middle school, so how does that work? And I understand
So-
that might be their right, but what's the
Yeah, so
goal?
a parent is supposed to send in a letter saying that they are refusing to take the assessment, and that's all that's required. We are planning on trying to see if we could get more participation at the middle school level. So historically, this came about when Common Core was introduced in 2012. There was the rollout of Common Core was not the best, and there was a lot of anger around Common Core, particularly when APPR came into effect, which was how we evaluate our teachers. They decided to link the state assessments to teachers' performance, end of the year evaluation. That angered a lot of parents, and they started refusing the test. Now, when ESSA was introduced in 2016, that became uncoupled. So testing has been uncoupled from APPR for many years, but a lot of people don't know that. And I think some people are still operating on the fact that I don't want that because my child had a bad day, that's going to affect my teacher, who I really like, so I think we need to do kind of re-educate the community as to how teachers get their evaluation scores, that is no longer coupled, and how we're using these assessments. Because assessment isn't bad. However we feel philosophically, about assessment, but I always feel that when we look at it's another data point. We don't use it for as a promotional criteria at all. So if a student doesn't do well, we offer support. So we're not having, like New York City used to do in the past, where if you failed an assessment, you repeated the entire grade. We don't do that. And New York City doesn't even do that anymore. So we use it as one data point. That's why we have other data points within in the school building to kind of support us. And the fact that these assessments are really rigorous, I think it's good for us. I think it's a good evaluation of our curriculum. So I personally don't fear them. I like data. I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I like the way they disaggregate the data so you can see your different subgroups. But I think it's also good to see how the standards that they're testing, how they're formulating those questions, and how we're doing because they give us all that information. They'll say this standard was question 2 and 4, and being able to link it back gives you information as a teacher on how to drive your instruction. So we have to do a little bit more of that, but it's hard to do it when only 30% of your student population is participating in the assessment.
Well, have we done any work around like communicating with parents and the community? Like the stakes for these tests aren't like all or nothing for the students or for the teachers, and they're actually a useful tool for us. I mean, have we?
We're planning on doing that this year. Now that we're
great.
seeing that the participation rate has, well, even though
Dipped so
if
low.
you see at the elementary level, I mean, it was huge, So I think now people are now kind of understanding. I think we need to do kind of a bigger effort now, particularly at the middle school, because I'm curious. That's it's hard. Being a middle school kid is hard. So we want to make sure that we offer them the proper supports. And I don't want it to just be iReady and report cards that are determining how we're supporting students. It would be nice to have another subjective, objective measure so that we get kind of like a full picture. Any other questions around? So high school. So the wonderful thing is, as you can see, our graduation rate is increasing, across the school years. Our graduation rate is higher than 90%. The reason that is not reflected in this particular report, and just so you know, all these reports are coming from a portal that the state provides. So I know there was a couple of slides that look a little blurry. I did the best I could. I'm not a techie, so I apologize for that. But this one basically has all students that are considered Beacon City School District students, even if they're not enrolled in our school. So if they're in a private setting or if they're at BOCES, so they get included here, and that's why you see a little bit of a dip. But our high school graduation is over 90%, and we've been able to keep that consistently. Okay, so this is the kind of like the blurry page, but I wanted just to show like the different groups and their graduation rate. The reason I like this particular page is you get to see the cohort of students, so it's 193 students. You get to see the numbers in each group. Now, a lot of times, the way the state counts our data, so you may have a student that is counted multiple times. So, for example, I always use myself. If they were collecting data when I went to school the way they collect it now, I would have counted 4 times for my school. I would have counted as a female. I would have counted as an ENL student. I would have counted as someone who was economically disadvantaged, and I would have counted as a Hispanic Latina. So I would have counted 4 times. So if I didn't do well on an assessment, I come up in 4 different groups. So that's kind of how the state looks at it. And if you have a cohort of students that are very small, so if you have, for example, you can see our ENL population in this cohort, there were only 2 students. So 1 student finished, 1 student did not. It looked like 50% of our ENL students did not graduate from high school, but that's not the case. It was a cohort of 2 students. So I just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention. But if you look overall in all our different demographics in terms of graduation rate, I think we're doing pretty well. We want to continue to make sure that we keep pushing and keep accelerating, get some of those 80s into 90s, some of those 90s, see if we can do 100%. We always want to make sure that we get every student as much as we can. So other demographics, so if you notice here, there were only 2 ENL students. On another report, it looks like 50%. Here, overall, they have it as 0. But it was only 2 students. The same thing as our, I hate this, homeless. They need to change that, that wording. But it's only 2 students that are represented, but because they count every single student as they should, and this is actually the different Regents exams that our students took this year and the percentage of students that reach proficiency. Now, one thing to highlight is that our Regents exams are administered twice a year. So that's why you might see Common Core Algebra on top and then Algebra on the bottom. The Common Core that's on top was an assessment that was administered in January. The one on the bottom was administered in June. And there's going to be different cohorts of students in there. So one, for example, my glasses, the Algebra 1, I'm sorry, the one on top is in June. The Algebra 1 that was administered in June had over close to 200 students who took that assessment. The Algebra 1 that was administered in January had about 60 students that took that assessment. So again, under New York State regulations, our students have to pass 4 Regents exams +1 in order to get a high school diploma. So the recommendation to decouple the Regents exams from high school graduation requirements is not in effect yet. It's something that obviously the Board of Regents has accepted the recommendation. It has not been voted on. So until then, our students have to pass at least those 4 Regents exams, which is why you see Regents that are administered more than once, because we want to make sure that students have enough opportunity, if they don't do well, to take them until they're able to pass them.
So the number at the bottom, that's the percentage of students who graduate or who got proficiency on the test.
yes.
That's not the test score.
Yeah, and the Regents exams, it's levels 1 through 5. So 3, 4, and 5 is considered proficient.
3, 4, and 5, okay.
Again, I got the data from a portal, so it's interesting that they changed how they represented this, but this was the bar graph that was available. And this is the breakdown, ethnicity breakdown of our students and the types of diplomas that they receive. So, in New York State, there's more than one diploma. So we have our local diploma, we have our Regents diploma, Regents diplomas with honors, Regents diploma with advanced designation, Regents diploma with advanced designations and seals. So we do have some students that have gotten, for example, the seal by literacy, the seal of civic readiness. So they color-coded it so that you can see by ethnic group the different types of diplomas that our students received. This also highlights any if students got credentials versus a diploma. And of course, if there were some students who did not graduate. As I mentioned before, we only had 2 ENL students. Gender. And I'm not reading it to you because, I don't want to insult you by reading things.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
So,
please.
We see some gaps, obviously, like coming up in the graduation data. Are we also looking at earlier, like test score data by racial or economic subgroups to kind of identify who needs help or how that's happening earlier in
So
school?
when, so it's interesting, when I went into the portal, there wasn't that information for the Regents exams available, but the ethnic breakdown for graduation was. So I had a kind of an overall percentage, and there was a way that I could see individual students, but I was looking for that. I was looking for the ethnic breakdown of it. But you could see it for all the other state assessments. In terms of how we're doing, one of the areas that I will say that I'm actually working with Heather on is that we are looking at our students with disabilities across the board to ensuring that there is more support for them, not just in terms of state assessments, but also in terms of graduation. It is an area where we see that there's a need. So we have kind of devised a plan to kind of support them, because one of the things we want to make sure that in the next couple of years, as our students are graduating, that we're not leaving anyone behind. So some of the trends that were identified through the data analysis. So as I kind of mentioned before, we noticed that our students are pretty proficient in using informational text to garner an understanding of what they are reading. We noticed that they're able to do that within the context of a multiple choice question. We noticed that they need some support when they're being questioned in terms of a constructive response, particularly when there's a higher tier word. So for example, if they're reading a nonfiction text that has a word like photosynthesis, for example, which is a tier 3 word, that's a word that's attached to a specific content knowledge. They're having a hard time, even with reading the information around it, understanding what that word is. So we know we need to support them in that. We notice there are many students who are in level 2 who were very, very close to level 3. So we know that we need to support those students. I like what Kelly Amendola calls them pushers, because they're almost like right there, like pushing them into level 3. We also noticed that, I mentioned the multiple choice, the needing support in constructive responses, but the big area that's going to be a huge focus for this year, and it was a trend across all content area and across all grade levels, 3 to 12, was vocabulary acquisition. So when there was areas that our students did not do well in, whether it was math, whether it was science, it was around vocabulary.
Do you feel like the science of reading and related curriculum are going to help address that issue?
Yes. And on the next slide, we're going to talk about how we're going to kind of focus on that, some of the supports that were. Now, the good thing is that we have things, again, to celebrate. We have 91% graduation rate. We had 23 students that received the seal of civic readiness, which is not an easy thing to get. We had 3 who received the seal of biliteracy, and we had 101 students with advanced designations on top of everything else. So that's good too. That's a great thing to celebrate. Now, in terms of kind of the goals for this year based on the data, so vocabulary. So when we look at vocabulary, particularly at the elementary level, really making sure that our teachers are doing those interactive read alouds in addition. Because the one thing is, yes, we want our students to have phonological awareness and phonics awareness and all that stuff, but we also need comprehension skills. We want our kids to be exposed to rigorous and rich vocabulary. And for them to understand that a word that I may see in social studies, and if I see it in math, may mean something different when I see it in math. So that's really important. So at the elementary level, the new reading program, if you recall when I presented it, they're doing 3 different levels of vocabulary introduction in every single module. So every single lesson begins with vocabulary. So there's vocabulary that's attached to the text that they're reading. There's vocabulary that's attached to root words, prefixes, and suffix, like all those things that our students were kind of missing with the curriculum that we were doing before is going to be done during this particular program in this 90-minute block. In terms of our K2 students, having the teachers do those interactive read alouds, having word walls, we're going to do a lot of work around what's the evidence that vocabulary is being introduced in class, what does the classroom look like, what should the students have, the artifacts. So we're going to be doing a lot of work around not just with the teachers, but also with the administrators. So when they walk into a classroom, they're able to have constructive conversations with their teachers, and they're able to see evidence of that. And again, not just in reading, because one of the things that we're talking about the science of reading is having everyone understand that reading is not done in just an ELA class, that you teach reading in all content areas, and that vocabulary has to be taught in all content areas. There is vocabulary that's very specific to math, that's very specific to science, that's very specific to social studies. So we want to make sure that they're doing that in their classroom. So focusing on specifically design instruction. So that's about teaching, making sure that our teachers understand and have the tools to be able to improve their practice. So it's like the science of teaching. Like, what am I doing as a teacher? Am I doing gradual release? Am I giving students graphic organizers if they need them? Am I making sure that when I'm presenting a lesson that I am have the objective written clearly, that I am repeating myself, that I'm checking for understanding, like those good instructional practices that all our students need. So this is not about students with a disability, but all our students need. Being clear about Tier 1 evidence-based practices. So we did a lot of work at the elementary level around Tier 1 supports the last 2 years. So that is now going to be done at the middle school. So I am working with some middle school folks on introducing Tier 1 practices in the middle school. And not that they're not happening, but I think a lot of times teachers don't realize that they're doing it. And I want to make sure that they know and they identify some of the things that they're doing. So if a student is struggling, we can give them more Tier 1 practices to do. Because not every student who's struggling needs to be in a special education class. The other thing that we want to incorporate into our lessons, New York State actually releases 75% of those test questions. And when they are released, they actually release the rubrics as well as all the answers. So incorporating those release questions into the everyday instruction. And that could be done simply as a do now, where the students are starting to answer some of those questions. That's a great thing to give for homework, where the students are answering some of these questions and then the teachers are going over it in the morning. Because one of the things that we've noticed is a lot of times the way those questions are worded, it's not that the students don't know the answer, it's that a lot of times they don't know what they're being asked because of the way it's being worded. And I will be honest, I look at some of the questions and I'm rereading it. And I'm 50 years old, so imagine a little kid, right? So if a 50-year-old has to reread a question to make sure that I understand it, imagine a 6-year-old. But we have to get our students used to how they're being questioned and the rigor in which they're being questioned. Because a lot of times the assessments that we're giving in our classroom are not matching the rigor of the state assessment. And we have to modify that. We have to work on that. The other thing is, so we are expanding our universal screeners where we are adding something across all of our grade levels in K-5. So before, there were certain screeners that we were doing with only our students who were coming up for our IST, our student support teams, or were receiving academic intervention supports. Now we're going to be doing that for all students. So all students are going to have DIBELS several times a year, as well as Acadians. Acadians is a screener for math that we included. It's going to give us another data point and another way for us to pinpoint where students need some support. Our teachers in K2 are going to be getting coaching and foundations just to kind of ensure that there's fidelity around end-of-unit assessments and how they're using those end-of-unit assessments to either reteach or move on in the units. And then, of course, we're going to be looking at, believe it or not, reducing the number of assessments that we're giving at each marking period and actually we're going to be using iReady to create some common assessments that are going to be given for each quarter so that there's cohesion across all 4 of the elementary schools on how they're grading the report cards and that the assessments that are being used are actually aligned to the standards. And then we're also going to be piloting, and this is not academic, but something that we had spoken about offering some social emotional learning support at the middle school. Because we know if our students don't feel good about themselves, they're not going to learn. So we are working with a MTSS team over there about possibly starting to pilot some universal screeners in South. So not giving it to everyone yet. This year will be more about some students that maybe are being referred to the RTI committee and see if we can do it there. When we do universal screeners for South, we do need parental permission to do that. So that's why we're doing it with a smaller group of students and see how we can expand it. And then, of course, coaching and professional development is really important. Can't do any of this unless we're offering professional learning opportunities to not just our teachers, but also our administrators. These are just some of the topics that we're going to be focusing on throughout this year, as well as our first PLD day on November 5th. I also forgot to mention here, Science 21. So this year, kindergarten and first grade teachers are doing the last round of the training. So at the end of this year, K through 5 will be fully implementing Science 21. Science 21 is actually a really great program that really is going to help us, I think, with that 5th and 8th grade assessment, because it's very hands-on. There's a lot of rigor. There's a lot of, it's very interdisciplinary with literacy. So the students are learning how to read with a scientific purpose, and they're doing experiments where they're using a rubric that kind of emulates that 5th and 8th grade exam. So we're going to be continuing to support our teachers in Science 21.
Are there any additional questions from anyone?
This maybe is too, like, conceptual question, I guess, but I'm just wondering, in terms of the response to I always feel like the state test scores are, should be taken with a grain of salt because there's not 100% participation. So it's important to me to kind of understand, like, what does that look like compared to the iReady scores, and is it all making sense? And then in response to, the gaps we're seeing and stuff like that, do you feel like it's embedding into the curriculum, or is it these, like, specific, like, when I hear that the state test is written kind of crappy and hard to understand for kids, I don't love the idea that we're responding by training our kids to, be able to decode something that was written in this way. So for me, I think, when we've talked about curriculum before, I felt like it's really, it's felt very holistic, and it's felt like it's really about, like, bringing kids along and looking for joy in learning and, all of that. And I know we're talking about, this very specific data, but can you just talk a little bit about how you're integrating this with the stuff we're doing?
So both things need to happen because, I'm the first one. I want my kids to be here, and I want them to love to learn. And I think the best way to do it, first of all, we have to teach our kids the foundational skills that they need. Because without those foundational skills, they're not going to get joy out of reading. They're going to be frustrated. So that's the number one thing, making sure that we have things in place where we are actually doing and exposing our kids to the concept and the practices that they need to be successful. Because if they have that, it doesn't matter what assessments come down the pike. They're going to be able to problem solve, and they're going to be able to master them. At the same time, we want to make sure the students have a fighting chance and have exposure to the way that these assessments are being written. Because, again, until we have the full implementation of the Blue Ribbon Commission, they have to take a Regents exam. And they're going to have to pass 4 Regents exams in order to graduate. And some of these assessments are preparing them for the rigor of those Regents exams. So I don't want, and I've been very clear, I don't want teachers teaching for a test because that's not learning, which is why using, for example, those release questions for, like, homework here and there, so our students are exposed to it, having as a do now. A do now is something the kids do when they walk into the classroom as the teacher's getting ready. They kind of solve a problem. So getting them exposed to it, but it should not take the place of good teaching. Because good teaching is good teaching. And I don't care whether you're a first grade teacher or whether you're a 12th grade teacher. There are certain, like I said, checking for understanding is just good teaching. That should happen in every classroom, in every classroom. Making sure that a student knows how to unpack a question and scaffolding that question. That's just good teaching. So we want to make sure that we continue to support that, but at the same time, giving kids opportunities so when they see something that they don't know, they're able to figure it out. If that makes sense.
It does, yeah. And I don't know if I don't feel like I posed the question very well, but that's exactly, like, I just want to, it seems important that we're pulling that work and embedding it into the work we're doing rather than, like, pivoting because of
Right.
this.
No, of course.
I think speaking maybe as a former principal and then a current dad, I think the Science 21 is a great example of this. Like, I just on a personal level, I've seen it really engage students, including my son. Its goal is to hit those higher level science standards, but the kids don't see it that way. So, like, the kiss of death, and we all know this, is all right, we're going to get ready to take the test in a month, and we're going to go over these state questions. I don't think there's one student in our district that gets motivated or excited to do that kind of work. So, like Saggy says, good teaching is finding ways to do that in ways that kids just aren't seeing it as, this is so I can do good on this test that I don't really care about, right? Like, it's the score matters to us, but like most kids don't really see it that way. So it's a challenge. And I think part of it is our messaging with teachers, like we want to focus on data, we want to focus on kids who are struggling, we want to focus on all the students, but sometimes when we do it in a way, it causes some teachers to be like, oh, well, we need to do more test prep. So we need to make sure with the focus on data that we're not also saying, let's do more.
Right.
And I'm not accusing any teachers of really currently doing that, but it's sometimes I've seen it over my career in lots of different places. It's like the go-to place. Like, admin needs the scores up, so let's hit like the test prep harder, and it's just not what we want to do. It really turns kids off, I think, in general to everything that's happening in a class, and that's the last thing we want to do. So I always think Science 21 is a great example. I think the new reading program at the grades 3, 4, and 5 is like a great example. I think some of like the curriculum that teachers have been writing and implementing is like all sort of great examples of ways to get at this that kids don't see what. Right, it's like those cookbooks where you're baking the spinach in and the kids don't see it
Right.
or taste it
Yeah.
or whatever, but anyway, I think we have a lot of different initiatives that get at that. But
It might be cool for the board to hear about that too, a little bit over the year, because I do think this is important, but it's like, this is like the kind of hard,
Yeah,
You know.
it's not my
In
favorite.
my opinion, the shift has become, the hard part is the shift has become recall versus like inquiry based, right? Science 21 has really shifted to, hey, what are you investigating? What are you finding out? And what do you draw from that, right? I mean, the Saggy hit upon it with the critical response 2-point questions, right? They're asking why and how. They're not asking for the right answer. The why is the ways that this proves it, and you can have any thought, like the kid could have any thought as long as they back it up. But the hard part is that kids don't want to be wrong, right? So then they're not putting down their thought, right? So it's teaching kids to come up with a reason, right? That you gotta like
Critical
be
thinking.
curious,
Yeah.
right? Get into it and then back it up, right? It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong, as long as you can support the way you feel, you're gonna get credit for it, right? As long as you come up with a thought and then back it up, you're going to get credit on those critical response 2-point responses.
yeah.
But like, it's how do you frame that? And that's like the resources that Saga was saying, that they're helping with that. Like Science 21 is great. Kids like love it. I mean,
It sounds
it's
amazing.
not it's not a dry program. The kids are really like,
right.
hey, figure this out. Like, and
Yeah.
Well, and when we
here's the
do
tools to figure it out.
when we do student focus groups, and some of you were able to, I know they're during the day, but some of you were able to join us for those. Consistently from grades 5 through 12, I don't care who's in the group, kids always say, because I always kind of ask, like, what's your favorite way to learn, or what's your, and it's always like when it feels like real life, when it's something that's not just like doing a worksheet, when it's like we're really engaged with other kids in the class, or something that feels like it has a real outcome, like they'll just name it over and over and over again. It doesn't have to be just kids in like advanced classes, it's kids across the board, right? And they just name it over and over. So, it's but it gets at that higher level. It's like we all kind of see it,
And the
right?
hard part is that they need the vocabulary so they can like investigate and kind of get it, right? So that's where
Absolutely.
the science of reading the pillars, like worldly knowledge, is an important one, right? So if they have the background knowledge as to that culture or something, then they can draw upon that to kind of make an inference and a rational thinking. And then like the knowing how to read. So is it the phonics, the fluency, the vocabulary, the comprehension, right? The ultimate goal is that we would want them to comprehend so they can think critically about what they're understanding, right? And that's the hard part, is if they don't have those base skills, then how are they going to be that part? So some of it is dry, but like the state has really shifted, I thought, to that.
Yeah.
Like kind of, hey, give them the base skills in that K-3 program so then they could really dive into that.
Oh, I know, and I feel like that is progress, and the way the state tests are, feels like they haven't caught up to the
Yeah.
way that we're supposed to be teaching kids now.
I don't think the teaching's caught up the way that this test is
Yeah.
assessed.
Because if it had, then the free response would be stronger.
Would be
but if
stronger.
the multiple
Yeah,
choice is
yeah.
stronger, the free
And-
response is
yeah.
not.
It's almost the opposite.
Right, no,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
And we,
Right, we're in
and
that
it's,
traditional like recall, do you know the facts, where
Right,
hey, you
multiple
could find
choices.
Google or
Yeah.
whatever, ChatGPT for that, right? And now it's like, yeah, we know you can find that, right? But why do you think that way?
yeah. And that was the thing with the science test, that our students had to be able to do that.
Yeah.
You know, and so we have to give them enough opportunities. So it's about creating opportunities. And I'm going to be very honest, personally, I'm a stickler about vocabulary. I think every child is capable of learning good, rich vocabulary,
Yeah.
even if they can't access it on their own. You know, and I just think that just needs to happen, where we're reading to our, I was a bilingual special education teacher. I have 5th grade students that were reading at a 1st grade level. We did Edgar Allan Poe in my classroom, you know, and I read it to them, and we had discussions, and my kids were exposed to really rigorous vocabulary, and I had words all over the place, you know, and because I felt, you're 12, yes, you're struggling lifting words off a page, but you're going to be out in the world, and you're going to be in a supermarket, and you need to be able to read the signs, and you need to be able to fill out a job application. And I want you to have options, and I want you, when you hear a word in a movie, that you know what the word is. So this is about encouraging that, because then kids actually are more engaged. They don't want to be treated like babies. You know, it stops that by 3rd grade, like kids don't even want to be picked up for AIS anymore. Like they want to be in their classroom, they want to be supported in their classroom, and they actually want to be challenged. They want to feel that they're smart, you know? So that's and I have to say, to tout this program, this new reading program, one of the things that they have at the end of every module is a project-based learning project, which is nice, you know, because so here's an opportunity where all the reading skills that they're learning, all these concepts, so not just skills, that they're able to then develop a project at the end of it. You know, so right now, I told the teachers that I was going to be nice to them, and that they, because of timing, they may not be able to do every project, but they had to do one each quarter for this first year. And then next year we'll add another until they're able to do all of them. You know, so because the more opportunity our kids get to actually interact with what they're learning, like Matt said, if it's not relevant, you know, I used to tell my kids we're learning cool words. So that's how I got them into vocabulary. The cool words.
Can I ask one question that might be
Please.
related to that? It sounds like there are a lot of exciting like reading and science projects. I think the 8th grade math is like concerning, and I know it's a subset of students, like it's the lowest participation, but it's still 40% of kids, none of whom scored proficient, or virtually none. So, and I know that vocabulary like influences that, and it's obviously a huge part, but are there any supports that we're giving to math teachers or kids who are struggling with the math part?
We do have academic intervention services at the middle school level as well. One of the things that iReady actually provides, so I know a lot of people think that the kids kind of go on the computer and they're doing kind of like these AI programs, but there's actually direct instruction lessons on there the teachers download, and they're able to work with the students in small groups. So the teachers are actually, they haven't been using a lot of them. So this year we are having iReady, the consultants kind of come back and do a PD with our 8th grade teachers, 7th and 8th grade teachers in math in particular, as well as our 7th and 8th grade science teachers, to kind of see what these new features are, because there's a lot of lessons there that they can download, and they can work with the kids in small groups. So some of that needs to start happening.
And
so
does
we
that
can-
have the same like richness? Because sometimes
Oh,
those like
yes.
personalized math things
Oh, yeah,
can be a
absolutely.
little rote.
Because it's still aligned to the standard of that grade level. It's just done in a scaffolded way. And it still has the same rigor because they have to introduce the same vocabulary. So one of the things that iReady does, even though as the students are taking the assessment, you may find out that, for example, 8th graders at a 5th grade level, but the questions that they're interacting with have to be standards-based. And so as the student is struggling, the question will become easier, or they might pull the question because the student's not ready for it yet. But it's still that standards-based question. and then all the support are standard-based. There's just scaffolding.
And my last question was just, do we have goals for next year? Like, what do we hope that our scores are going to be next year? What does that goal setting look like?
So I can share that with you after I meet with the principals. I have my goals, but I want to make sure, I want to stay with the principal because I have an overall arching goal. Personally, for me, when I looked at the data, what I would like to see, I would like to see that that gap in vocabulary decrease by at least 50%. I think that's something that we can do because I think if everyone kind of works on this, because our kids are sponge, they want vocabulary. I think they're going to be able to take to it. And if we're doing it in all the content areas, how can we not do better? Because there's a correlation between math and science. There's a correlation between ELA and social studies. So if everyone is doing it, and again, not that the assessment is the end all or be all, but I'm seeing also this in iReady as well. So when I look up the data in iReady, I'm seeing vocabulary as this area that we need to support. So that's what I would like to see. I would like to see that particular area of vocabulary. That's kind of what I'm targeting because I feel that that's going to help everything else, including the writing.
Makes sense.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, thank you, that was great. So now, excuse me, the board will adjourn to executive session to review the employment history of a particular individual. The board expects to return in about 45 minutes, I think. Is that right? Okay.
We have to vote on it.
Oh, I forget every time. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Passes, what are we, 7-0? Okay, we'll be back in 45. We are back. Thanks for your patience. It is time to move on to the superintendent's report.
Okay, thank you. So I just have a few updates to run through. I'm excited to share at our next meeting, we'll have student advisors to the board attending. So we'll do like the official announcement when they're here, but we're working through some of the details. But we have 4, and I think, if I remember correctly, it's 3 seniors and a junior, which we've always had some combination in the past, so I think that's good. And they seem all very excited to join us. So at the next meeting, most of them or all of them should be here for introductions, and we'll go from there. October 16th, we have the Blue Ribbon Commission Forum. One of them is going to be here at the high school. SAGI will be co-presenting with Kim Fontana, Superintendent of Pauling. So we'll be publicizing that, and that is part of, the various efforts of the Blue Ribbon Commission to get the word out about that. A quick thank you to just this past weekend is one of those weekends where the number of teachers, administrators, staff people that were involved in a lot of our kids doing a lot of things over the weekend was vast. So the main ones being Girls in Sports Day on Saturday, another huge success, and then the Spirit of Beacon Day parade. So many different student groups participated. I now sort of just move our part where we're in front of a band. That's my new rule. So I'll have Let's Go Band ringing in my ears for the rest of the year because they played it over and over, but they sounded great. But it was just a great day. The rain cleared out, and we had literally hundreds of kids in the parade and staff, so that was awesome. And then just this may seem sort of random, but I just wanted to give a personal thank you. NISCUS is the statewide superintendent organization, and they have a fall conference, and I went pretty much for the first time. I tried to go several years ago, and it didn't work. But we always have typically had a board meeting right in the middle of the conference, and this summer I was like, I really want to make this board schedule different so I can go, and I went, and it was a great learning experience. I focused, not surprisingly, some of my time in sessions that focused on finances and budget development, and there's a lot of districts that are having some of the same issues we are, so some of that will be coming out in Finance Committee and in future meetings, but it was great. And the board schedule looks a little different this year, and it's partially because of me being able to go to the conference. So I hope I can keep doing that. And then we just to kind of re-engage around strategic planning and long-range planning for the district, we have a survey going out. We're going to send it out the week of October 15th. We'll have a slightly separate one for staff, but we'll have one that's going out to all of our families. We'll have a couple weeks where it's open. It's going to be mostly open-ended questions, and we'll be taking that data and help us both plan for budget, but also future efforts with all of our strategic planning. And then lastly, I just wanted to this is an informal update, but we're now 1 month in to the phone policy being in place, and so I just wanted to state it has been a successful launch. I haven't done any of the formal sort of feedback things. I was waiting till October to do, towards the end of October, to do that with teachers and students. But I've been getting a lot of informal feedback in terms of people feeling good about the launch. We have not had huge numbers of students out of compliance with it. In fact, those numbers have been pretty small. And then I've also, this is very unscientific, but I've been focused on Roundabout at our lunchtime and recess. One of the questions that came up from the board was just like how much are kids on phones during lunch and recess. So this is unscientific. I've been to about 8 or 9 lunches over the course, and I've gotten the Roundabout administration to kind of also look for me. At the 6th grade level, this is an estimate. I'm going to say about 3 to 5% of kids will pull out their phone or have their phone out during either lunch or recess. 7th grade, it goes up to about 5 to 7%. 8th grade, it's about 8 to 10%. I will say the recess part, we've had some really great weather this fall, but the recess part at Roundabout, kids can be at the Gaga pit, they can be playing basketball, they could be playing football. They have little soccer goals set up, so they are playing soccer. They also have the volleyball nets where they are playing volleyball. There are some kids who kind of do some dancing, and then those, I don't know what kind of tree it is. The big tree that's there, some small group of kids kind of sit under the tree. But the phones out at recess number is very, very small so far. I think the weather has probably played a role in that. I don't have those estimates for the high school. We'll kind of focus on them next, but those numbers have been interesting to gather. So again, like the number of students who've been referred or have had their phone sort of, their phone privileges, to use language of the Code of Conduct, is very, very small across both schools. Kids who've lost their phone privileges for longer than a day between both schools is 2. So kids have been very understanding, and I get a lot of random feedback from kids, either out in the community or sometimes at school, and they'll sometimes say, "Are you the guy responsible for the phone policy?" I'll say yes, or partially yes. And most kids, interestingly enough, will say, "I totally get it. I understand why we're doing it." And they may not like it, especially at the high school level, but they understand why. So that all said, we're going to keep focusing on implementation, talking with teachers about how it's going, ways we can support them. We had a phone information, like a session for parents in terms of learning about ways to deal with phones. We're going to do more of that. So this is an informal update, but I think we're off to a good start with it. And we'll do more formal updates as time goes on. When the principals do their presentations, they can get into it a little bit more. Obviously, Brian and Corey. But it's been going well. And then lastly, we still will be looking at other schools and trying to learn from what they're doing too. The last Dutchess superintendent meeting I was at, we ended up talking about this for probably about 20 minutes. And there's a range just like across the state. Lastly, we're also just kind of monitoring what's happening at the state level. My sense is that if the governor does something with it, it would be for next school year. Maybe that's kind of obvious, and it'll go through legislation, but we're trying to pay attention to that process as well. So that's all I have to report, but it's been a great start with that.
Great, thank you. Semra?
I had a great time at Spirit of Beacon Day. That was great. I will say that I've had a few conversations with parents or people in general about the phone, but not much, and generally good feedback. 1 or 2 parents wanting like just a little more information, and I've told them that we are having those sessions. So I think that's really great that we're going to continue to message that out, because I think people do want to continue to hear more about it. I thought thank you for that really thorough presentation on data, and I just hope there with the data that we're also looking at transparency and continuing that conversation with parents, and because I think people really, it's hard to dig into that, it's hard to wrap your teeth into that, wrap your arms around that data, and it's helpful if we can parse it out and make it understandable. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Chris?
No comments tonight.
Okay.
Thanks.
Levon?
No comments.
Okay. Eric?
So I attended the curriculum committee meeting last week. Very informative. Saggy kind of went through the trends with the teachers in both secondary and elementary grades, which was really good. The elementary also had a really good discussion about the report card grading, which is great. The fact that They're getting to the point of being consistent across the grade levels, which is wonderful, which is great to hear. They also discussed about upcoming PD Day in November. So overall, I thought it was a really productive meeting, at both ends of it. And if you ever have a chance to come to the meetings, it's very informative and gives you a good sense of what's going on. So it's really a good meeting. October 15th, we do have a Facilities Committee meeting, 6 o'clock, I think.
I wanted to ask members if they were open to 5:30 of that committee, just because we have a lot to talk about.
Who's
on that?
Anthony, you on that?
Yeah.
And I think Chris, are you?
Yeah, it's,
You? Kristen's
Anthony,
not on it, right?
Eric, Meredith.
I can do 5:30.
Yep.
I can do 5:30.
It's just simply, we have the, 2021 to still talk about.
Right.
And because there's still some things that are, being worked on. And then we really want to kick off the new one, 2024. And I just think an hour and a half is more realistic.
Okay,
Okay.
that's fine.
Anne Marie, could you remind me about the team?
I just wanted to mention, I went to the football game Friday night. I thought it was, besides the outcome, it was a good game, and I really, I thought that the security was excellent. It was a big crowd. Kids were really into it. I just thought it was very well organized, concession stand. So I was really pleased with the whole thing there. Just in generalities, it was great. And I have talked to a few people as well about the phone policy. I've heard it's going well, so far. It will be nice to hear when the principals do present about how they're thinking it's going. But overall, I think from what I'm hearing, it's been a good start, and hopefully that will continue to be progress down the road too. So that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anthony? Okay, we're speeding through everybody. Meredith?
I'm not a sports person, but I heard that they did really well considering the other team.
Yeah, I just said the outcome. The outcome was not what we wanted, but they played well.
But it doesn't sound like winning was a realistic goal, so to score and to do as well as they did was maybe great.
Well, winning's always real. It's possible. They did play a really good team. You're right. You're right. But it was you're right. No, I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah.
They did play a really good team.
You try your best.
They were good.
Let's see, we have a policy meeting set for the 17th at 6. And the NISBA resolutions meeting is on the 10th. Did everyone receive that packet? I don't know if it's just sent to the advocacy liaison, or I'll forward it to everyone. And if you have any questions that you want to, or comments that you want to share with me, please feel free. I'm going to be attending that, and that's all for me.
Okay, great. So I wanted to start by seeing if we can figure out a better date for our first board retreat. And instead of sending emails back and forth, we're just going to do it all together. The reason I'm asking is because the October 23rd date that we had settled on is the day after the NISBA convention in New York City. And so NISBA cannot have one of their people on staff to do that day. It would be somebody they contract out. And we would really like to have the same person moderating as before. So I have a few October and November dates. This would be about 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. So let's just go through the dates, and you guys let me know if they would work for you. October 18th, who would that work for?
Friday night?
Look, I'm desperate.
I can't.
All right, just say no. October 29th. October 29th.
That's fine.
Yeah, I could do that. Works for me.
I might be a little late.
Oh,
That,
okay.
Sorry, what was the time again? 6 to 9?
6 to 9.
Okay.
But we could push it a little bit if
I
we
mean, if you start, I think I can make that.
jump in.
I
Okay.
think.
What about you?
No.
Lady. All right.
I could try to change what I have, but
That would
about the
suck, but I
third?
can make it work.
What about the 30th?
But what?
What about the 30th?
also same problems.
Also dicey.
I can't do
Okay.
the 30th.
Okay. All right, so moving into November, November 12th.
No.
No.
Have any Mondays?
Yeah, aren't there some Mondays on here? Sorry, hold on, let me see.
If everyone else can make the 29th, like, I don't want it to be held up just for me, because I'm gone a lot of November, so I think I'm going to screw up all the dates.
Okay, I actually, yeah, so I guess we could do November 4th, the day before Election Day. I don't know if that works for everyone. If that works for everybody else, that would work for me.
November 4th is good for me.
Yeah, that
Fine for me.
works.
I could do the 4th.
I think I can do it.
November 4th it is. All right. So I will reach out to them and let them know. Okay,
The
so,
Friday was a good effort there.
It made everyone else agree.
Guys!
You're right.
let's all hang out together on a Friday.
No, that is a good strategy. Start with the Friday
you go.
meeting.
I'll go to Saturdays and Sunday morning.
Outrage them.
Did, that was terrible.
November 4th, okay. So then the January dates, it just to get us started, because I do really want our other two board members to be there for that one, but just to get a consensus, because if there's a date that works for most of us, then that will, then I can kind of push it through. So I don't know what days of the week these are, and I don't want to hear any guff. Just tell me if you can do it. January 9th or the 10th?
That's a Friday, just FYI.
January 15th or 16th? 24th.
Are you looking for yeses or for no's?
Friday.
Yeses, yeses.
Oh,
You
okay.
you chose all Fridays.
29th,
That's lunar.
30th.
But I could do it the 29th. I was just saying that's the
Yeah.
lunar holiday. Schools may not feel.
Oh, are we
I
allowed
mean-
to do a retreat during a district holiday?
Yeah, we're not the kids.
It's not a shutdown day.
It's not a shutdown
Oh,
day.
it's not.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
So, I mean, I wouldn't mind it. Would any of those dates work, January 29th or 30th?
January 29th.
29th would work.
Either one works for me.
29th is good.
Either.
Okay. No.
I'm
Neither
gone that
one.
whole week.
Did any of the other
January
days?
6th, does January 6th work for anyone?
January. I think I have something that day.
I could do it January
Monday.
6th.
So Monday it works for me.
Yeah,
that's why
I could do that.
Wait, hold on.
I don't know if that works, but
That works for me.
Actually, I can do that now. Okay, so does January 6th work for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
With the Mondays.
not positive, but I might. I'm not sure.
Okay, what about you, Chris?
Yep.
Good, okay.
Everybody's like, worst day, yes.
Okay.
District business.
So I'm
All
gonna
right.
put my own-
What's the tentative date there?
Okay, so tentative date is January 6th for that one, and then November 4th for the other one. Okay,
So it's November 4th and January 6th?
yes, yes.
Also 6 to 9 on the 6th, is that?
Yes, that would be the plan. So more information forthcoming about that.
Okay.
I also wanted to mention, I got a message about an opportunity from Arts Mid-Hudson. They're hosting a free event called Thrive, Making a Career in the Arts. It's designed for high school students who want to explore careers in the arts. It's happening Thursday, October 24th, 5 to 8 p.m. at Duchess Bosie's in Poughkeepsie. It seemed like an interesting opportunity for kids who are interested in being artists, so I wanted to bring that up. And then also the Lower Hudson Education Coalition, they sent out a little nudge this week to take their legislative advocacy priority survey. It's going to be open until 5 p.m. this Wednesday. They are a really well-resourced organization, and they do a lot of advocacy, so it's good to flag things to them that, just maybe they haven't considered, or to add your voice so that they really understand that the big issues are big issues across the region. So I wanted to mention that as well. And I think that is all. Oh, do I remember correctly that we needed to move the prawl meeting?
That was, I wanted to get a sense from Kristen, and I reached out to her today, but I haven't heard back, so.
Okay, so on pause. Okay,
Yeah.
so potentially. All righty. All right, so moving on to the consent agenda. The use of the consent agenda permits the Board of Education to make more effective use of its time by adopting a single motion to cover those relatively routine matters which are included. Any member of the board who wishes to discuss individually a particular piece of business on the consent agenda may so indicate, and that item will be considered and voted on separately, thus preserving the right of all board members to be heard on any issue. I just realized as I was reading that I did forget to note the changes to the agenda. So I do want to review the agenda. We have one change. The language changed for item 12.15. But that's the only one. Is that right, Vicki? Okay. Ooh, I'm so glad I caught myself. Okay. Are there any items that any board members would like to have removed from the consent agenda?
12.03 Glenham 2-3.
12.03, can you say that second?
Glenham
Glenham,
2-3.
2-3.
There were multiple 2-3s, that's why.
Okay, got it.
I have 12.08 H7.
12.08H7. Okay. Any more? Okay.
Laura, if I had a small question about something, should I just ask it or remove the item?
When we do the motion to approve, I'll say questions or comments, and you can ask then, or should he pull it? What's the better?
A little.
Either way.
Either way. You can
Either
do it.
way?
Yeah.
So yeah, you want to just do it during the, okay, great. Okay, so can I have a motion to approve 11.01 through 15.10 minus 12.03 Glenham 2-3 and 12.08 H7?
So moved.
Comments or questions? Or second, sorry.
Okay.
Second, okay, comments or questions?
It was just a little question. I noticed the auctioning of the old buses, and I didn't know what the expected lifespan is of buses. They seem to be like in the low 100,000 miles, so I just didn't know what the lifespan was, or if that was, I know we just bought some, so.
They usually the useful life's about 8 years. We keep them into 10, 11, and 12. So the mileage is an issue, which is why they're being auctioned instead of traded in. So the small buses on auction actually generate more cash than us trading them in. The big buses we kind of trade in when we buy new ones. But
Thanks.
it's on a rotation basis.
Do they pass, were they still passing the Department of Transportation?
Yes. But they got to a point, like a car, that it costs too much money to just
To maintain them?
Makes sense.
Okay. All right, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, passes 7-0. Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Wait.
We need to do the other ones.
Two that you pulled.
Oh, I'm sorry, you guys, I got ahead of myself. Okay, so can I have a motion to approve? I should do them separately, right?
Yeah, we're going to abstain.
Yeah, because you're one of talking. Okay, 12.03 Glenham 2-3.
So moved.
Second? Okay. Comments or questions? Okay.
I did.
Oh, sorry, I should have repeated it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And any opposed?
Abstain.
Abstain, okay. So passes 6-1. All right, can I get a motion to approve 12.08H7?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Second by, okay, move on. Okay, comments or questions? And all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstaining?
Abstain.
Okay, so passes 6-1. Now can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes 6-0, 7-0. Good night.
Night.
Whew.